Right, you'll agree a fairly tumultuous week in Parliament, so let's wrap that up for you. More reaction to the Sona speech and the aftermath. Political commentator Klerk joins us now via Skype. Professor, good evening to you and welcome. All of this, of course, overshadowed by the FW de Klerk apartheid row. How do you see this playing out as we go forward?
Well, what we've seen during the debate the past 2 days is that especially the ANC members almost across the board refer to that and distance themselves from it, because I think the complication for the ANC is that he was one of their guests at the time of the Sona speech last week. I think they also want to make it clear that though they defended him initially, that is certainly not their position. I think what he said is generally not being supported, even amongst some of his former supporters and members in the National Party. So from that point of view, I think what President Ramaphosa was saying today is a reflection of the sentiment of most people, actually.
All right, so there might be a positive that comes out of all of this. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, writing on Politics Web earlier today, says two things. One is you can flagellate FW de Klerk, making him the target of simmering anger. The second, he says, is to look at the hurt and anger itself and ask why the wound is still there. And then, he says, find a way to heal it. That would seem to be fairly sensible. How do we find that way to heal the wound, though?
Well, I think what many people initially were saying is that there must almost be a legal or judicial approach to say that he must be either prosecuted for denying that the apartheid, which in a sense he didn't do, but he was more looking at it from a legal point of view about crimes against humanity and whether it was that or not. I think over time what is now more emerging is to say that it's not going to make much of an impact just to prosecute someone for something that he said, but it will, in the end, not change much about the public sentiment. So I think what is becoming more and more of a view is to say that it is about how to deal with a type of a public debate, a type of a public dialogue about these issues. In the past, earlier in the middle 1990s, there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And to some extent, it was a combination of the symbolic parts of it in the form of the public hearings, as well as the legal elements of it in the form of amnesty applications. But that was only for a very short period. There was no real follow-up to that, and a lot of work has actually not been finalized. So there were many calls to say, but there must be new initiatives in the form of different forms of dialogue, including President Mbeki towards the end of his term was very much talking, and after his term as president, trying to promote the idea that there must be some form of national dialogue about racism, about societal issues and cohesion, social cohesion as it is referred to, as well as about the economic issues and how that relate to how people interact. So that these are, in my opinion, will over time have more of an impact and a wider spread impact than individual prosecutions, for example.
Professor Kotze, let's move on from that. This is also going to be remembered as the Sona of gender-based insults. We've had apologies both from Mr. Malema and Mr. Ramaphosa today. But the ACDP leader, Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, warning today that Parliament, and I quote, has descended into chaos and people were no longer taking it seriously. Is he right?
To some extent, but I think the response from President Ramaphosa was, in a sense, bringing back the balance in this situation. On the last week with the Sona address itself, it unraveled, and it became a shouting match between the ANC and the EFF. I think what President Ramaphosa today is, by apologizing on behalf of the ANC and by implication repudiating one of his own members, and at the same time then also saying, well, in his case, his wife who is implicated in this, or who is regarded as a possible victim of this, she's not there to explain. But his other wives were able to say, well, this is not the way in which he does it. So I think what we've seen here is that he tried to restore some dignity. He spoke a lot about gender-based violence in general, irrespective of what happened in Parliament. And then right at the end came back to it where he apologized. And I think to a large extent, it took away the focus from him and of what he is accused of. At the same time, it should have done the same to Julius Malema, but the way in which he walked out and shouted that he cannot be accused, he's not guilty of this, in a sense meant that part of that debate is still remaining, and it still remains for Julius Malema to exonerate himself from these speculations or accusations against him.
All right. Professor Klerk, a political commentator, thank you very much.